Welcome to the Purple Political Breakdown.
There's a real rhetorical and political disconnect between our recruitment efforts, what our military is told, what our generals are told up until they reach a certain stratosphere, and same thing with what we tell the American people. And I think we just have to be honest with the American people. That's really the problem. Is we're telling the people of the United States one thing and we're doing another.
We shouldn't be involving ourselves in these global issues if we're not even going to be around to kind of inherit that peace that we create. And then, when we kind of go away, what's going to happen? That's one of the problems is we did not equip well enough Afghanistan to handle our not being there, and then it just went away.
It's very interesting that when other countries kind of perceive us as Americans, they also see us in like two different lights. They see us as gun crazy individuals who want to shoot everybody, like we were talking about, or people who want to make everybody trans. Do you want a great website like this? This is my podcast website where I direct the audience to come to watch the content, listen to the content, read the blogs, and much, much more. If you want to have your own customizable podcast website, then join my affiliate link in my description to sign up for something called Podpage, and they can help you customize an easy podcast website for your personal podcast. Sign up to get a discount now. Again, use the link in my description to join Podpage now. Are you enjoying today's podcast episode? I really hope you do. And I really hope you enjoy the fact that I have an amazing guest talking with me and having this great discussion. If you, as an individual, personally have your own podcast and maybe you want to have great guests on your podcast as well, I got a deal for you. In my description, there is a link to something called Podmatch. Make sure to join that link through my affiliate link so you can sign up to get matched up with other podcast hosts and podcast guests so you make sure you are never missing an episode without a productive guest to have an amazing conversation with. Podmatch is similar to any other kind of matching site for the most part, and it's super easy to use. Just $6 a month, and you can have a guest for each and every podcast episode that is tailored to your specific topic. So again, join the link in my description and join Podmatch now. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode number 32 of the Purple Political Breakdown. And today we're going to be doing a interesting conversation in regards to American isolationism, the pros and cons for the concept, and how legit it really is for America to kind of adopt such a philosophy. So we'll talk about that, of course. We have an excellent guest that'll show up a little bit later who's going to provide his insight in regards to the topic and a lot of interesting things that's going to be discussed. Of course, you got me, your host, Riddell Lewis, and my co-host, Jonathan, and we're going to kind of hold it down for the next hour or so, and we're going to talk about a lot of interesting things per usual. And I don't have a review to kind of discuss as of right now, but we do have our What You Need to Know segment. So we're going to start that. I'm going to introduce some other ideas for segments a little bit later. But to start off, Jonathan, how you doing, my guy?
I am doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Obviously, busy with making sure everything runs. Trying to make sure that we got some consistency with the Monday, Thursday. It's gonna be, twice a week can be tough for some, especially when it comes to political topics, or actually, I guess any kind of overarching topic where you have to do a somewhat of research to kind of understand where you're going on, what you're talking about. Because I do feel like a lot of these podcasts I see out here, I mean, people don't know what they're talking about, and they just be spouting out their opinions. So, got to make sure we're on our P's and Q's regarding that, of course. So, we're going to start off with what you need to know. Current events that's going on that may interest you, of course. Some of them include, there's actually a whole lot here, Jonathan. Be prepared. Some of that include a four-party coalition in Netherlands apparently collapsed over the immigration issue in the country. A U.S. drone strike and kills ISIS leader Uzama al-Maharji. I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly. Mexican armed forces to take control of capital's major airport in a anti-corruption move. Hey man, Mexico, keep doing your thing. Get the cartel out there.
Oh yeah.
Wagner Group chief. I'm not even trying pronouncing his name.
Yeah,
Met
Geni
with
Prigozhin.
I believe that's pretty good right there. I believe so. He met with Putin. Apparently, him and a couple other leaders met with Putin. Sweden to join NATO as Turkey accepts their bid. So they're kind of inching closer and closer to be part of NATO, while as Turkey's trying to join the EU, of course.
Mm,
Biden says no to Ukraine's bid to NATO until the war is over.
mm-hmm.
Microsoft obtains Activision. Big dub for Xbox users out there. Justice Thomas of the Supreme Court under scrutiny because of his relationship with a very rich guy. Very, very suspect. The hearing with an FBI director that has happened today when we are kind of discussing this live, which that would be like 7:13. And lastly, like I said, lots of news. A member of the ULC, I forgot what the acronym means, I should have wrote that down, to discuss the definition of what it means to be dead, more specifically what it means to be brain dead, under a controversial circumstance of a 13-year-old being brain dead but alive, and the family not wanting to end his life due to a religious objection.
Mm.
So they're kind of trying to convene in regards to the topic itself, define what it means to be dead, so to speak, so this controversy doesn't happen moving forward. A lot of news, Jonathan. A lot of news. What do you think?
There's a lot of news. So I haven't been on my phone very much today. It was a very busy day at the courthouse. Lots of people to get through and technical issues. So, but I did hear about Ukraine not being admitted into NATO, which is a big thing because I know Zelensky was really holding out for that. So I had heard that. I know we were talking a little bit before about the FBI hearing, um, and also what is Activision? I don't know what that is.
Oh man, this guy is a complete novice in the video game industry.
Yes.
Activision is a video game, from my knowledge, it's a video game corporation that has some of the more popular video games. Most specifically, probably the most popular would be Call of Duty, right? So
Uh,
they're the ones that are in charge of Call of Duty. Just because Microsoft is in control or in charge of all the franchises under Activision doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be console exclusives, which I'm
mm,
sure some PlayStation owners and maybe PC owners, but more so PlayStation owners are worried about because they care so much about this console war. But it'll be interesting to see what they do moving forward. I
mm,
would say Microsoft, for the most part, knows how to handle business, and I do think they're better equipped to handle multiplayer gaming versus Sony. I think Sony is more equipped to handle single player games, such as the God of Wars, the Spider-Mans, for example. So, yeah,
mm.
that's what's going on regarding that kind of
So
video game console war.
are you an Xbox or PlayStation guy or neither?
We out here, bro.
Okay, so that's an Xbox controller, yeah.
Yeah, we out here.
Okay.
For sure.
Let
I
me
don't
go grab my Wii remote real quick. So-
I don't hold. I honestly, moving forward, I don't really care about the console war personally. At this point, I don't even play video games enough to actually care.
yeah.
But I will say that sometimes it can get a little ridiculous in terms of the console war. It's like there's an adamant hatred for someone who plays the other
Mm,
console. I think it's all fun and games for the most part, though. Xbox recognizes that they're kind of falling behind in terms of the console exclusives. What as long as I can play games that I want to play, then I don't play single player games anyway, so it doesn't really matter for me.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
What
so
did you find? Oh,
What were you about to say?
I was just gonna ask what you find interesting in the current news cycle.
So I watched the entire kind of FBI director situation, and
Hmm.
a lot of things come out of it that's very interesting for me. One thing, obviously, that was super interesting in regards to this hearing was obviously the fact that Republicans, for the most part, was attacking the FBI director, and then Democrats were trying to not really saving him per se. We're trying to give him a chance to explain the situation. And the interesting part about this situation with the Republicans attacking the FBI director is one, he's Republican, two, he was appointed by
Yeah.
Trump, and three, a lot of their biggest issues was the former FBI director, but they're kind of still angry, so they're attacking the current FBI director. So imagine being a Republican, being appointed by Trump, the president, who's also a Republican, and going into this with Republican values and still getting attacked by Republicans. That just it makes me
Well,
realize. Go ahead.
I feel like probably one of the reasons they're doing that is because they're angry at Merrick Garland, because he's been kind of a crony, and he's kind of untouchable, head of the DOJ. So that could be one of the reasons. I'm not. That's just pure speculation on my behalf, though. But yeah, I can understand the frustration with that. What were you? I mean to cut you off.
Well, what I was gonna say is it's really enlightening when you see something like this, and I guess I would have more understanding, even though I don't agree with the attacks. I would have more understanding if he was like a Democrat or liberal or supported Biden, but he doesn't in any way. Well, obviously he supports Biden being the president, but in terms about his political beliefs, so I'll be like that would be one thing for me. But even if you're like solely on the side ideological with a certain group, even if you try to do everything to the best of your ability, even if you do everything correctly to your ability, it really just shows that you will still get attacked in these political battles. And I'm watching this, and I'm more than willing to hear your opinions regarding it. I'm watching the FBI director, and he notes several times that he has initiated new reforms to kind of fix the problems that was mentioned in the Durham report. Now, I
Mm.
specifically haven't watched or read the Durham report, but he actually admits that a lot of the things that was said was stuff that he didn't agree with. A lot of the stuff that the Durham report indicated was stuff that he wanted to fix. And from his own words, he said that there's nothing that I think he lied about necessarily. And I think we have to continue working to make the FBI like more efficient, better in a lot of different areas. So he mentions that. And then a lot of the kind of attacks that they were trying to have on him, it seemed, was in reference to the Durham report, in reference to stuff that happened before him. And he
Mm.
mentions it several times. It's like, hey, I did this, I did that, I did this. And we've changed all those people before, for the most part, from his knowledge. He got rid of them. We changed in a lot of different areas, but they were really trying to hammer him. It's like, nah, you got the horrible people from the Durham report probably are still in, even though I have no proof to prove this. And you, even though you're a Republican, you're still after Trump and you let Biden go. And I'm just right here like, bro, what are we talking about? Like, I don't see the kind of any type of I feel like one Republican gave him the benefit of the doubt. The rest was just like all over him.
Do you know which one it was? Was this in the house? Was this the house? A house investigation?
Um it was a hearing. It was a judiciary hearing.
Oh, okay.
So the a lot of the senators was asking him questions, um, having their own testimonies in regards to different type of circumstances. One thing I will kind of, I guess, fault the FBI director is that it didn't seem like he knew everything, especially at the beginning. He kept on saying, "I don't know." To my knowledge, um, I have to go refer to this. I'm gonna get back to you. But after hearing more of it, you kind of understand where he's coming from. Because when it comes to these situations, one, you have to be very careful with your words because people like to twist your words, hold you to that, and use those words to kind of fault you, make you look like the worst person ever. So he was extremely meticulous with his words. So
Hmm.
I understand that. You know, obviously you don't want
Yeah.
to be saying something you're not sure about. So he was honest when he wasn't sure. He said he'll get back to him after doing certain things. And another part that people actually should understand to a certain extent is that even though he's the head person, he's the FBI director, the expectation for him to know everything is unrealistic. That's why you delegate certain responsibilities to other departments. So you can't really be mad that he doesn't know everything. He may have a general idea, but if he said he's going to
Mhm.
look into it and give you information later, I don't know how you can be necessarily mad at that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably one of the reasons he's getting railed on so hard is a lot of Republicans, particularly, have taken on to the notion of just disbanding the FBI.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that, and I think they have. I agree to an extent with the sentiment, but I don't know that everybody has the best reasons for why they want to disband the FBI. Um, the other thing, as you mentioned specifically, like all the stuff about the Durham report, and then how um, they're saying, "Oh, well, they're probably still in there anyways, even if you're telling me that they're not." Is that correct? Is that kind of
He
what's
said, to his knowledge, certain people aren't in certain spots that the Republicans would deem uh, shady.
Mhm.
But he's saying, obviously, that in terms of those certain individuals, he said the higher ups were kind of taken away, the leadership. But
Mhm.
not, he said there's still an ongoing investigation. Some of the things he said constantly in regards to the Margot
Mar-a-Lago.
Laga Margot Laga stuff with Trump, the stuff with Joe Biden regarding the documents in his garage, or the stuff regarding January 6th. A lot of the things that he was saying is that there's an ongoing investigation. I can't go over that, but they kept on trying to, hey, tell me more about the investigation. Like, I'm not going to tell you more about the investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. So a lot of that stuff happened too. So he constantly says when things were like ongoing in terms of their what they're doing, he always kind of referred to that consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of these things that I think is kind of a dangerous notion is the constant conspiracy theories. And like I understand a lot of the like so this is from my perspective as a conservative, a lot of the things that conservatives and Republicans were saying were going on, and then especially during COVID and all these things, and the liberals and the leftists were saying no, these things aren't happening, and then we find out that they are happening. And so one of the things that's happening is the conservatives, I feel, especially like peculiar right wing Republicans, are like every conspiracy theory is absolutely true. They all must be true because of the last 2 years in which we've said this is happening. No, it's not happening. Oh, yes, it was happening. And I think that's a foolish thing to believe. And I think this probably applies to the whole FBI thing. Is like it doesn't matter what you say because you represent the arm of the government, the enforcement of the government. There's some shady stuff that's going on, and I don't care what you say, it's going down. And so no matter what this guy says, he was probably going to get railed on and attacked anyways, especially now in the era of just clicks. Everybody wants to have the one statement that said, "Oh, I got you," and then wait for him to stutter, and then they'll clip it real nice and put on that dur, 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 with the glasses thing,
Oh
and then post
yeah,
it everywhere on Instagram.
one statement that made me laugh because I thought it was dumb personally is when one senator said it may be lawful but not constitutional, and I'm like, What does that mean? What do you mean it may be lawful and not constitutional? What are you talking about here?
Yeah.
So he said that, and it was like one of those final gotcha statements. It's like it may be lawful, but it's not constitutional. Like, how's something lawful and not constitutional? What does that? How does that make
Well,
sense?
so technically, something can be codified into law that is not enumerated in the Constitution. So there's plenty of laws that get appealed because they say it violates the Constitution. That's what constitutional lawyers are for when a state passes a law that violates a portion of the Constitution. Um, so I can understand that. So I didn't need to know more context. But overall, like there's very few laws that are unconstitutional unless and usually when that happens, it's because it's and the problem with the Constitution is some of it's kind of mysterious. Um, and the way that it's written can be sometimes hard to navigate. Um, so most people really wouldn't even know if something violates your constitution, but typically we would assess if it violates the Bill of Rights is what happens most often.
Yeah, I think for those situations, it's more so a interpretation thing because, like you said, Constitution can be very hard to interpret, or the different levels of interpretation can be vastly different. We've seen that time and time again for something like the Second Amendment and the word infringed, right? Um, I think it's either that or a situation where there's a misunderstanding in terms of what the law says versus what the Constitution says. So, in the circumstance when he said it, I think to kind of you go into the two big points that they were attacking. They were talking a lot of stuff, but from what I found, the two big points that they were definitely attacking was one, the FBI's investigation on Donald Trump and the Mar-a-Lago situation.
Mar-a-Lago.
Mar-a-Lago
Yep.
situation, all right? And two, the situation with FBI's influence on social media companies.
Mhm.
So those seem to be the two biggest things. And in terms of what he was referring to is the FBI's contact with the Bank of America, and apparently the Bank of America gave the FBI information, or was talking about giving people the FBI information in regards to like credit transactions, debit transactions, and weapons sales. Now, we didn't get the full context of the email because it was just one screenshot. And after seeing so many kind of like non contextual gotcha screenshots and all that stuff, I'm not going to make a full opinion without knowing more context. He did say he wasn't familiar with the email and he would have to look into it to see the full context of what is going on. But he says the conversation he was having with the Bank of America and social media companies like Twitter, for example, was all done very legally. It was all done very lawfully. One thing I wish he went into a little bit more in depth with was how the FBI suggested certain things to the social media companies, not outright dictated or enforced that they do something, but suggested something. And I wish they
Yeah.
went into that a little bit more and what he means by suggestions. I do, I do think there's an interesting argument behind the validity of the FBI suggesting certain stuff to the social media companies, not tell them outright, "Hey, I want you to ban you," but it's like this may be a threat, so look into that. So that one was a little. I wish they went into that more. As for the Mar-a-Lago, they really had no good. The Republicans had no good explanation in terms of Trump having these documents. That
Yeah.
the only way they combated it was like, but Biden, which I
Well,
which
so I
which
can.
I'm not a fan of.
So from what I've heard, I think I agree. It's like, oh, but he did this too. And there is something to be said, especially because like this is the same kind of snafu that Hillary got in trouble for. But I don't want to get into the this and that. But from what I understand, one of the strongest points for what Donald Trump did being legal is there is no technical that I know of, right? And what from what I've this is what I've heard. There's no like actual process by which one declassifies information when you're the president. You can just say these things are just declassified. So the problem is every single hour of Donald Trump has not been recorded. So he can articulate, oh yeah, those were declassified. So there's not like a way, and maybe I'm wrong, right? That's totally possible. This is simply what I've heard from certain people. Um, that is one thing that can be said for him. But whether or not he should have them is another argument entirely, and whether or not he should have had them at all, I think that's certainly not appropriate to just have them at your house if these are in fact very important government documents. From what I've heard, they're actually not particularly important. um the problem with what everybody's saying that Biden did is he was never the president. These documents are alleged to be from when he was vice president, and the vice president has no ability whatsoever to declassify documents. Hence why most conservatives are upset, because allegedly, from what I've heard, there is no formal process that Donald Trump can just there's nothing he doesn't have to sign, staple, print, submit to Congress. He can just these documents are now unclassified, which is why there's certain things that I think, depending on like what area they fall in, like if it's CIA information, if it's that sort of stuff, that's a different story. But if these were under the authority of the president to classify and declassify, he can just say they're declassified.
So, from my understanding, the counter argument and the Joe Biden stuff, like I said, they said they were still investigating Biden and that situation. So, I'm not going to comment on that one. In terms of the Trump situation, the counter arguments that I've heard was that one, when Trump declassified, he was no longer president. And then the second argument that I heard, which actually the FBI director said, is that the locations that he put these documents in were not secured locations, and that's also a problem. So there's a special term he said in regards to what a secure location would be, but having it in your house just willy nilly in different areas, such as like the bathroom or the dining room, would not qualify under that, of course. So those are the counter arguments I've heard in regards to Trump and his situation. Obviously, the trial's still going on, so we'll have to see what they find. The investigation is still going on, so we have to see what they find. But depending on what they find will determine a lot of stuff. Apparently, I also heard, and you didn't say this, but a lot of the Republicans are bringing this up, was the fact that the Miami office wasn't the one who investigated or did made the made the action to go investigate his house. It was the office in DC. A lot of people were speculating, oh, there might be something going on with that. And the FBI director's counter argument for that was because the National Archive, which is in DC, was the one who opened up the investigation and requested it. And
Mhm.
since the National Archive did it, that would fall under the jurisdiction of the DC office, and that's why they're the ones who took action. So that is
That's an argument that I don't understand. The point of the FBI is that it is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which means there's jurisdiction throughout the country. I wouldn't
yeah,
see why.
their argument is my guess is their argument is that obviously it's in DC and obviously Biden's in DC, so they had a certain secret agenda. So I'm getting more conspiracy theories, basically more conspiracy theories. So we'll see what happens in regards to that, of course. But yeah, that's what I seen. I think the FBI director personally handled himself very well. If you watch it, you can let me know if you disagree. I think he handled himself very well. I did get a little annoying that he wouldn't answer certain questions, but
Hmm.
if you don't know, you don't know. And I do think some he should have known, but you know, tough job.
Yeah,
He seems like he's doing a good job, and it's just crazy that Trump picked this guy, and he's a Republican, and he's just getting attacked by Republicans. It's insane to
yeah.
me. It's crazy. No one's safe. Imagine if that was a Democrat. Oh, that would that'd be crazy. That would
Yeah,
be
that's
crazy.
one of the things that's kind of actually I think Paul made this observation to some extent. He kind of touched on a similar vein. Is um like Democrats in some ways are more loyal, in other ways are less loyal, right? Like when it comes to the president, if they pick a president who is a Democrat and they don't like him and he wins the nomination, then they'll just never they just won't go up to vote. Republicans aren't that way. Whoever is their guy is their guy. But at the same time, we hold our people to a much higher standard in some ways, and that's kind of like air quotes around it, is like we're still very vicious with them no matter what. So you can see this kind of in this example here. Um, we don't conservatives, they don't give their people passes. As for the Democrats, they kind of do. Like it's like, oh, this person's a Democrat on our team. We don't really care what they do, and whatever they do, we will defend them. Republicans are like, oh, blood in the water, and they just. And I think that kind of demeans the party, but at the same time, I'm not like a huge party advocate. I'm a Republican because I'm a conservative, and that happens to be the party that represents me at this point in time. But that's an observation that I've kind of made. Do you disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree with that. I definitely think it changed a lot after Trump, um, especially because Trump and a lot of people who follow his sentiment is very anti-establishment. It's kind of
Mhm.
turned the Republicans from originally they were definitely more pro-establishment to much more anti-establishment after Trump. So that's a big thing because obviously he thinks everybody's coming after him, and then people who follow him follow the same sentiment. And it doesn't help when you have something like the Durham report come out. But then if you continue that sentiment, that doesn't help as well. And the pettiness really highlighted the biggest petty moment for me was when one Republican senator was coming at him because they were going over the fact that there was certain inquiries that happened in regards to them using something known as FISA and the legitimacy of making sure that they're not using this technology inappropriately, which allows them to look up certain stuff on the internet and social media and all that stuff. I haven't looked into it inherently, but based on the contextual clues, that's what I gathered. And they were talking about the situation how before you, there was millions of, bad, potentially illegal inquiries using the technology, and then after you, he was talking about the director was saying, "Oh, we've did a lot of work. We're up to like 98%, 99% success rate." And then the senator is like, "Oh, you don't care about that 1%?" And I'm like, "What? What did you expect? What did you expect them to say? 100%? I completely got it out." And especially when you have to realize sometimes because the people who do it legitimately to utilize the FISA technology to do something like look up their girlfriend or ex girlfriend, obviously that would be illegal and they'd be kicked out and get punished for it. But he said that there's some people who just make mistakes. It was an honest mistake, and obviously that still wouldn't that would in terms of our analysis of how this thing's being used, that would be still an inappropriate way to use it. But it was an honest mistake, and that honest mistake only being like 1% of the inquiries or 2% of the inquiries and you're still attacking the man, I'm like, bro, like, what are we doing? What are we
Yeah.
doing right now? Just like petty attacks. It didn't really help. It'd be crazy if you go like, man, I kind of hate the Republican Party now, and switches allegiances. I think the only Republican that did was like, I hope you don't switch. Was the one that was kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt, kind of
Do you
talking
know
to
who that
him.
happened to be?
I don't remember. There's so many names. I try to pay attention to what affiliation the people were for the most part. The people who were attacking him the hardest was Texas Republicans and the chairman, who's a Ohio Republican. Funny enough,
JD Vance? No, he's House. No, Senate.
I
Interesting.
don't remember. There's so many names I don't remember. He's to be fair, if I describe him, I'll be describing a generic old white guy. To be fair, so we won't be
So
getting anywhere there.
JD Vance is young. He's the senator from my area.
Yeah, he's definitely older. He's definitely older. He seemed like he had a lot of beef with the with the FBI director, though.
Well, yeah,
For
that's
sure.
one of the things I said is like on politically, like everybody sees the FBI as Democrat because of Merrick Garland and what Merrick Garland's done with the DOJ. So I don't really think Republicans care if the head of the FBI, because I think they're probably looking at it more as like this is an arm of the DOJ the DOJ has been using, and that's probably one of the reasons they were attacking him so hard. And then just overall, like the anti-establishment sentiment that you pointed out, and the fact that they just want the FBI to be disbanded.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that the Republicans and the conservatives would say disband the FBI, but at the same time they would scoff at the idea of disbanding the police. I'm like, what is the difference between what you're doing and what you're doing, and in terms of what it looks like? If we talked about the legitimacy and the efficiency of what the FBI does, and we've talked about that a little bit, Jonathan. It's an interesting conversation. I would say that the FBI, from what heard from what he said, there's a lot of good that it does in terms of anti-terrorism, domestic terrorism. There's a lot, and this is such a good point he brought up. There's so many actual terrorist attacks in terms of someone who's about to attack a certain group that they stop, but nobody hears about.
Yep.
Nobody cares about. You'll never hear that. And that's such a good point in terms of what they're doing that nobody knows about. They're only going to hear the stuff that happens that everybody hates, obviously, right? All the human traffickers that they go against, and the horrible people regarding the pedophiles and stuff like that, and dealing with the fentanyl situation. So I would have to really look into the FBI's job and to see if there's really any agencies or departments that can take over these type of responsibilities.
So
I'd
this
have
is
to look
my
into that.
argument for why the FBI should be disbanded. Um, and I'm not like all in like the FBI must be disbanded. From what I've heard and the people who I've listened to who articulate the point poorly is that right now the FBI is a wing of the DOJ, and it's just a strong arm that's just attacking Republicans. It's like, well, yes, but when a Republican DOJ gets in there, and then you will want the FBI to be on your side. And so it's just because the current political party. This is my reason why I think one of the ways we could mitigate the problem of the FBI being turned into something like the NKDV or the police state, I guess we can call it, whether it be the Gestapo or whoever it be. Because that's kind of what people are worried about, especially Republicans right now because it's a Democrat majority party. The way that I'd see it is like you articulated, the FBI has a lot of different departments. But in the federal version, the federal branches of investigation and law enforcement, there's like 4 or 5 other agencies. And the FBI has a department that handles the same sort of thing as each one of those agencies. So, like now, even the IRS has an investigation wing. The Border Patrol is the Border Patrol, and they have an investigative wing. The ATF is inherently a investigative wing. So is the DEA. And so each time when one of those agencies gets involved, the FBI is typically also involved. So I don't see the necessity to have that centralized, unified um, investigative branch, the FBI, when we have other agencies that are not as well funded, that are much more specialized and localized. And so we can get rid of the FBI and take those agents that are doing the similar jobs, take the allotment of money that is given to the FBI and allocate it out to the more specialized and more. And then there's, of course, the Secret Service, which is the other one that I forgot to mention. And so we can take those people, and because the FBI has departments in each one of those categories, take those resources, take the supplies, and get something less centralized. So then we can mitigate the problem of a central kind of police state wing, and we won't lose any of that thing because there's already so much overlap in the FBI. And I'm not particularly sure if there's a particular anti-terrorist organization other than the FBI, that's something that someone like the DEA or probably more like the Border Patrol could handle very, very easily. And that's my argument for why we don't necessarily need the FBI. Like, I'm not one of these it must be
Well,
disbanded.
I can't say the Border Patrol, or I don't even know about the DEA either, because they also count in domestic terrorism. So that would also indicate like hate crimes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Would also have to
Yeah,
encompass
but
that.
the Border Patrol is primarily concerned with people getting into our country, right? So then, I mean, obviously, terrorism has to happen in our country, and they would have to cross the border to get in, or they're
The
domestic
what I'm
terrorists.
what I'm saying, yeah, domestic terrorism is a completely different thing. I
Yeah,
definitely I see what you're saying. I think there is a valid argument in the sense that having an overarching branch that's kind of looking over everything has a lot of value.
I mean,
And
right?
uh,
Even the United States Postal Service has an investigative wing.
yeah, it's good.
There's
It's
so
good
many
that
investigative wings.
it's good that there's so many layers to it. I think the problem obviously comes in when you have a biased FBI leadership that kind of just listens to what the executive branch is saying. I think when that happens, for sure. But in this situation, where it seems to me, from what I've heard, and I could be wrong, it seems to me, considering the situation, that this is probably should be one of the more unbiased circumstances you could ask for the FBI, considering it was chosen by Trump. He is Republican, and a lot of his values kind of align with Republican. And he's looking at things. See, for me, it seems like he's looking at things very objectively, and
Yeah,
it's always tough when it comes to a leadership because you always have to rely on leaderships to be objective. They should, for the most part, mostly be objective. But if we have a truly objective FBI, then they would honestly be the best ones to kind of handle these circumstances, and they would be the best ones to kind of alleviate any type of innate bias with any of these agencies within their organization, right? So
yeah, yeah.
it's
I
it's
think
a it's a tough situation.
I think one of the reasons that we still see this partisanship and the reason that we still perceive the the FBI is because of the DOJ and because of Merrick Garland and the decisions that he makes have a trickle down effect because obviously the FBI reports to the Department of Justice, which oversees a lot of these things. Which is another way that you could articulate a counterpoint to mine is like, well, these still some of these fall into other categories, but some of these agencies still fall under the DOJ, which means whoever has the DOJ can still, obviously has the ear of the president, but also all of those who run each individual agency as well.
Yeah. Might talk about it a little bit more depth in a different time. We'll talk quite a bit about the hearing. Like I said, Jonathan, if you check it out, it'd be very interesting. And it's interesting that Republicans are attacking Republicans with the FBI director, but the same thing is happening on the left. One thing that I want to start introducing for people, ladies and gentlemen, is that I want to start introducing different subtopics. So I'm gonna the two subtopics in mind right now. It's called social subtopic. We're just gonna follow a more social topic of discussion, and a kind of bipartisan subtopic where we get a little bit more nitty gritty in terms of a bill or a philosophy that's being implemented in America, and we do a more formulated debate style to show you how bipartisan should work and go over that. So that's stuff we might discuss in the future. But the thing I was mentioning in regards to the left destroying itself is the stuff regarding Anna Consparian. So she was, no, she, I might still be. She said she's thinking about her political affiliation. I don't think she's going to the right, but she may move towards the center a little bit more. Is she was a well-known progressive, a part of the Young Turks, and in this situation, after she went on a political podcast, I don't really remember the name of the podcast. She went on there, expressed her opinions, kind of not redacted, but re-observed a lot of the things she said in the past in regards to, for example, the stuff with Kyle Rittenhouse and her opinions, saying, "Oh yeah, it definitely was self-defense." In regards to that, I don't know if you remember this, Jonathan, but there was a situation where a woman seemed like she was being a Karen. She had her dog with her, and she called the cops on some guy saying that, "Oh, he's about to steal my dog." But from the video, it seemed like she was just being a Karen, and because he was black, she, was just calling him out. But come to find out, after getting more evidence and more context, he did legit say that, "I'm going to take your dog," before the video even started. So he actually did threaten to take her dog from her, and she wasn't being canned. So she redacted her statements in regards to that, saying that after looking at the context, she had every right to be afraid regarding the situation. She also said something like, "Oh yeah, I got attacked by a homeless person, and it was a very traumatic situation, and not harass, more like sexually harassed and attacked." From my remembrance, apparently the homeless person went behind her and was like air humping her. So very obviously sexual harassment. And she got obviously terrified. Her husband came and all that stuff. She talked about it on maybe social media or the Young Turks channel. And people started coming at her. It's like, "Oh, why you, going after this black person, blah, blah." Even though she never said the race and the homeless guy was white, but they were attacking him, assuming that the homeless person was of color. So a lot of these situations stack upon each other. And now she's kind of rethinking how she used to think. And a lot of people on the left are like attacking her. A lot of like people on the far left mostly saying she's a grifter, saying she's transphobic, saying, you know,
I love how that just gets in there every time. You can say like no matter what you say, like, "Oh, you're this phobic, you're that phobic." It's like I didn't say anything about that. Or has she
uh,
come out against the transgender movement as well?
I think she said something. Let me use my memory skills. She did talk about trans people. I think it was either I don't remember. But from what she said, didn't seem transphobic to me. But to be fair, I have a way more level grounded mindset than a lot of these crazy lefties on Twitter. So anything that kind of sways from the popular leftist opinion is transphobic. So maybe it was
That
a
is,
bathroom situation. I don't remember. I don't remember.
yeah. Yeah. Well, so the YMCA near me about like bathrooms and stuff. Um, my mom works at a YMCA near me, and they had a policy where um anybody could use any of the bathrooms, and they were hosting a like a swim meet, and there's all like these like middle school younger girls, and this like 45-year-old dude wearing a bikini just went in and just sat in the bathroom for like 30 minutes in the locker room and just watched all the girls get changed and ready for the meet. So,
The bathroom argument's so interesting. And we can have a full episode, not full episode, maybe a subtopic. I'm not gonna have a full episode about the bathroom topic, but the argument is interesting to me after really thinking about it, because someone brought up, and I was watching the different hearing. I think I told you and Paul about it, where it was the hearing where they brought a 16-year-old trans kid to speak on her life or whatever. And I'm like, "Hey, bro, why is a 16-year-old here? I don't care what a 16-year-old has to say."
it's
So it
60
was
to be able to vote soon.
no, that's such that is such a
A
bad
horrible
idea.
idea.
That's a
I know plenty
horrible
of
idea.
18-year-olds that shouldn't vote.
That's man, it's if they're trying to make 16-year-old, who would benefit? I feel like lefties would benefit more if 16-year-olds vote, right?
Oh yeah.
Democrats, but
Oh yeah.
Republicans are much more culturally centralized than the left. But in general, I feel like the left would benefit more. But anyway, so back to my point. So when I was hearing one thing about, there was a situation where there was an all female like trauma center, and it was for women who've been sexually harassed, assaulted, or whatever, and it's only for females. And there's a situation where a trans female went in, they're like drunk or whatever, very still looked very masculine, and they kicked him out, her out. I'm about to get canceled just for that, just for the pronoun right there. But they kicked the person out, and the person got very angry and wanted to sue and all that stuff. And what it made me think of is I do think there's a legitimate context behind this conversation. I mean, I think the best answer is like have a trans specific place, but if for some reason you can't do that, that you can have a trans specific
Well,
bathroom, well, even that would be tough because trans female and a
so
trans male being in the same bathroom is
I
also
will
too.
articulate the point that I've heard on why that wouldn't work. Okay, trans women are women. Therefore, if you make a trans specific bathroom, you are inherently admitting that they are not actually women, which I happen to believe is true. So the very nature, this is the same problem with like trans only sports, and there's other like physiological issues with that as well. But by giving them a trans person bathroom, you are taking away their quote unquote what rights, because they identify and are, in their minds, actually women. So if they make a trans specific bathroom, all of the trans people will be upset, which is why a lot of the Democrats say no, that's not possible, and it's usually centrists that recommend this as a good alternative, as oh, just make trans bathrooms. But the conservatives will say no, they're not women, or if it's a male to female, they're not women. Therefore, they are still men. Therefore, they still have to use the men's bathroom. But the Democrats are saying no, no, no. These are women, therefore they have to use the female bathroom. And if we give them a third bathroom, it's just going to turn into the family bathrooms that already exist in many places. And that's where I would go, because there's not going to be anybody in there. Because all the conservatives will say no, they got to use males. All the Democrats will say no, they have to use female. But the one people that will certainly not use it will be the actual transgender people, because they're going to go into the one that they identify that they actually are.
Yeah, I for sure heard that argument. I don't care about that argument. I think for the
Fair enough.
most part, once we I'm not going to go into who's actually a woman or who is actually a man. One thing we do know is the word trans is in front of female and the word trans is in front of male. So inherently, even by the namesake, it's different. But I think something important to consider, I think a better argument is that we wouldn't have to create one bathroom. We would have to create two bathrooms, two additional bathrooms, logistically. And the reason why is obviously because trans females and trans males aren't the same at all. So having a bathroom for both of them would be, to be fair, very, very weird and awkward. Having a trans female specific bathroom, having a trans male specific bathroom is the only way you can truly go about that situation. And the logistics of having four bathrooms and potentially a family bathroom can be tough. I'm not going to get into the economics behind that. For me, from what I determined personally in regards to these like female specific areas or male specific areas, is that there's a lot of context behind this circumstance that I feel like can be considered. In a situation where, for example, there's like a female trauma center, but a trans female really wants to get in there for their own personal trauma, I think there's a legit argument that can be made is as long as you pass extremely well, then you should be allowed to use said space. Because,
So the plastic surgery is what determines your femaleness.
well, that and the drugs, right? So, and obviously how you take care of your body. Because if you don't work out a certain way, if you don't train your vocal cords a certain way, and I'm not really saying that dictates whether or not you're female, but in terms of a legitimate scenario of one giving them the opportunity to get or access the space or get the help they need, I think that the better way to kind of go about it instead of having a blanket no you can't come in is kind of identify it based on passing. And I feel like that situation's a little bit more doable because if someone goes throughout their entire life really trying to be looking like they're trans female or looking like they're female and they pass really well and the point where they're just as skinny or whatever compared to a woman, putting them in a male centered space when you look like that probably wouldn't help at the end of the day. It probably wouldn't. So that's kind of something that I feel like should be considered. And I don't really care about the counter argument that, oh, I mean, if they're trans, they're trans. Like, if you really want to be female, you better try your hardest to look freaking female. If you're not trying, then the point of this is mute to me. If you're not really trying, and if they live their life as female, if they look like they're female, if everything about them screams female other than general organ, then I think there's a legitimate argument that they should be able to use said space to an extent. So that's something I would consider for sure. Sure, it would have to go based off like what the person considers passing really well, but I feel like we can determine that honestly, personally. Like if the guy can outlift me, man, I'm just saying that's probably an issue in that situation if it's very obvious. Like for example, the you remember, have you seen the I don't want to even call this a debate, but the interaction between that one trans female and Ben Shapiro. Do you remember that back in the day?
Mhm.
So if someone like that came in,
Wasn't that Caitlyn Jenner?
no, no, that for sure wasn't Caitlyn Jenner.
I
It
thought
was
it was.
no,
Maybe
it
that was
was
a different interaction. I remember. I'm
yeah.
gonna send you home in an ambulance. Yeah.
Yeah, that one, that one. So in that situation, obviously they don't pass very well, whether they want to agree with me or not. They just don't. So, uh,
Yeah.
oh, just got a message from. Stop right there. Yes, this is a little mini ad. Don't skip. Don't skip. All I want to tell you right now is that at the end of the day, when it comes down to all the discussions I want to have, I want to be able to communicate with you, the audience. I want to be able to relay a message and receive a message from everyone and try to come up with these great solutions that I keep on talking about. So if you want to be part of the community, make sure you go to the website and sign up for not only the email list so you can get weekly emails from me for the podcast episode, informational sessions, all that great stuff, but also sign up to go on my Discord so you can be part of the discussions, debates on my live streams. So be sure to go to the website www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com and go to the email list, sign up, and go to the Discord and join the server. Now back to the episode. From the guest, he said it would be right there, so just checking.
Okay.
But yeah, that's probably something I would consider. I'd be willing to consider for sure.
Yeah. I just don't believe that that's like an ontological category. I don't think that God makes mistakes when he puts like the souls of females into men's body and vice versa. So I don't like I have all the sympathy in the world with someone who has gender dysphoria that's something that's in the DSM-5, even the newest iterations, they still have it in there as a malady of some kind. And I think they need help. I don't think the cure for that though is what is currently going on. And I don't want to get you in trouble by saying any more about that. So
Hey man, I've said what I said, but hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. How's it going, man?
Pretty good, pretty good. Are we live yet?
Yeah, we're live
Okay.
discussing.
Literally, I'm getting a business call literally right now. Can I just mute myself and be right back?
Hey, you're fine, you're fine.
Thanks, Kay.
But when it comes down to, I see what you're saying in terms of the ontological argument, and I'm fine with you having that opinion for sure. The I guess the thing is, and it kind of coincides with a different type of argument in terms of how much we should configure society to make sure we're helping the mentally ill and
Mhm.
the especially the ones that man, the conversation of like the people who their brains get completely transformed, and this is typically due to some type of childhood trauma. So it's not more than likely, from what has been found, for not even trans people, but also people who are like trans-abled, or I'm gonna stick there. I don't want to talk about the other ones, but those people usually kind of come into their mindset based off some type of childhood trauma to a certain extent, and the only solution is to kind of have them live out their experience. There's really therapy and all that stuff tend to, or drugs tend to not work. So I'm also sympathetic. I would say trying to make it, ah man, this is gonna get people
So
upset. Trying to make it normalized is questionable, but I would say
so
you always
what
have to be
I'll
sympathetic to these
I
people.
could we could do a whole episode on this topic that I don't know if you want to do because of obviously this is a not a
Nah, and
very
I don't care about getting canceled, bro. We
okay,
do what we gotta do.
but there's so much. Have you ever heard of John Money?
I've heard of John Money and the other one that was
The other one
very
is Alfred
central.
Kinsey.
Yeah, yeah. Not gonna lie, the only way I've heard about them obviously was from the "What Is a Woman" documentary from Matt
Yeah.
Walsh, and I don't think there's any excusable actions you can have for these two individuals for sure.
Yes. And so those studies that they did, and I did my own research into this, and I've read other books about it, but their research, their patently fraudulent research, is the research that is still cited today. Last year, they erected a statue of Alfred Kinsey at a famous gender study in Indiana University. Their research is the research that's still cited for all the stuff about brain transformation, about trans people. That is, they cite their research still. That's the only research that they actually have. There's one other study that they'll cite that came out in either 2021 or 2022 that they cite as like, oh, this proves gender affirming care. But it's like there was like 20 people in the study, and I believe six of them dropped out within 6 months. And this is the long term study that they cite, and it was like maybe 30 people tops. But even 100 people on this issue is that's not a big pool of research, let alone when like six of them drop out within the first 6 months because they already regretted their transition. So there's a whole host of methodological issues with the research that they do. um and so yeah, I'm not convinced that, even like, obviously there's famous research that shows like people can implant memories into your mind. So especially when you're younger, you can make yourself remember events that actually never happened. I forget the lady's name, but there's a famous psychologist that did that very thing. It was Elizabeth something. But I think in a lot of areas, this is kind of what happens is these young people are very uncomfortable with their age, with the way that their bodies are changing. And then they see on social media all of these very negative things, and then they kind of create memories for themselves that like, oh, well, you know what? I always kind of did feel like a guy. I was always tomboyish. I was always this sort of thing. I was always that sort of thing. And now I'm in this area where all of these hormones are being flooded in my body, whether it's a boy or a girl. And then they're seeing this as a plot. And the more and more this becomes mainstream, the problem is the more and more this becomes a plausibility for certain people, let alone a lot of the breaking news that has been coming out with clinics that are saying that they don't do this to minors, but actually are. It just, to me, it's very worrisome. And to me, the solution is not just let them live out their experience, because we can talk about the suicide rate of these people as well, who realized later on, like from the one long-term study that actually was done, 10 years is when they begin to most regret their transition. 10 years after the surgery. So 10 years down the line is when all the issues are really going to start accumulating.
So I'm gonna say two things, and obviously we're not gonna focus on it too much. We'll have a full episode about it at a different time. But the first thing is that when it comes to the gender study situation, obviously the two scumbags are scumbags. But when it comes to the gender studies research in terms, and it's more specifically the conversation is revolving around the young, I think most people will agree that it's relatively non-conclusive. I mean, a lot of European countries decided to kind of stop in terms of their care until they get more research on the subject matter. For 100% certainty, I think a lot of these institutions say surgery should be an absolutely no. It should never be a situation. The gender affirming care is a lot more nuanced, but the research is not definitive. So, I definitely see what you're saying in regards to that, for sure. My thing is I don't really care about the social media trans people, um, because there's a lot of things in that situation that's very complex, and a lot of it affirms. And I don't even the memory situation. I do think there's validity behind that, but I don't even think it's necessarily a memory misremembrance on who you are. But I think honestly, when you're that young, you're not really sure what you are anyway. And the problem is anytime where you kind of toe the line of tomboy or tomgirl, there's certain types of affirmations that you are that thing, and that affirmation is not healthy, right? So, I when it comes to social media, I don't think it's really
Well,
healthy
so one of
for
the
these.
problems, I think one of the reasons they articulate the problem with the late onset gender dysphoria, which happens to social media, is typically those people will go on to maybe not get surgeries, but at least take the hormone stopping, the puberty blockers. And certain of those puberty blockers are chemicals used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
Yeah, a lot of the research on that as well is very non-conclusive as well. So I would never give my kids allow my kids to take drugs like that. There have been some arguments that it is reversible, but it's a
It's
very
certainly
touchy.
not.
It's a very. I'm with not giving kids drugs. I think most people in America is with not giving them surgeries. Gender affirming care is a little bit more interesting, but I think for the most part you gotta you have to let kids live and then decide what they want to do when they become adults. If they want to be X, Y, and Z, then go ahead. I don't. I mean, you're an adult. I don't really care. Um, but yeah, I think for the most part, like I said, we could dive into that a little bit more in the future. Let me check on the guest. He got a work call, so I don't know what's going on with him at the moment. But we did say the main topic of discussion would be American isolationism, and we kind of talked about other things in the meantime, of course. But the conversation American isolationism is a very interesting topic, and I really don't think, for the most part, a lot of these are very nuanced discussions. I don't think any rational person could make the argument that we should be 100% isolationist or 100% we should be involved in every single thing. I don't think any rational person would make either argument. But what do you think? Are you 100% either way?
I'm not. I would say I lean more towards isolationism, but certainly I think me and you were talking about this. I don't know if it was after a podcast or during a podcast.
Yeah, it's probably after.
I think it was after a podcast. Like one of the best ways to like ensure the safety of a neighborhood, right? Especially when I'm concerned about my house, is first get my house in order, make sure everything's good, get a good security system, maybe get a couple of weapons that are suitable for defense. And then after you do that, like, well, what's the next thing to do? Then you go on the proactive side and you help start cleaning up the neighborhood. When you can make the neighborhood cleaner, then that's like obviously the pinnacle of safety. And then of course, I mean, you can't really worry about the city. You can't really do much about that, which is I think how you could extend that out to like the my bordering nations are my neighborhood, and I want to make sure those are checked. I want to make sure those are good, and then you can worry about anything else, or you can just maintain your current state.
All right. Hey, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, are you good? You're good to go.
Okay, I
Our,
want to offer my sincerest apologies. Typically, it is not as haphazard and haggard and disorganized as it is right now, but I am coming back from paternity leave for my newborn child, and this is my first week of work. So if my logistics seem haphazard, it's because they are.
all right, I completely understand the situation. My friend has recently had a baby, and he decided that, hey man, I'm gonna kind of take a leap of faith and have some good time now that my daughter's born with my wife again. And he
Oh
thought
no,
he thought he was skilled in what he was doing,
no,
and well,
nope.
now number two's on the way. So
Nope. That's advice to the folks at home. That's why you wear protection. That's why you at least do the rhythm method. That is unfortunate. So, I mean, like, God bless him. I hope he loves both of his children. But, I'm sure he would have preferred to have a little bit more time between kids.
I mean, I told him, "Hey, bro, you gotta wait until I get like close," and he was like, "Oh no, I'm just gonna wait." And a couple months later, nah, all right. I was like, "Okay,
Brave man. Brave man.
I agree." But yeah, glad to have you on the show. Obviously, people who are listening, this guy is. I've seen his content. He talked about a lot of different political issues and topics. I would say I appreciate anybody who's much more nuanced in the conversation. You're not. It didn't, from my point of view, you don't kind of go to either side extremely, and you kind of focus on what is going on, the facts of the matter. So, kind of started out here. Obviously, I'm the host, Riddell. This is my co-host, Jonathan. And can you introduce yourself? Tell people you're about.
Sure. So my name is Connor. I've recently started identifying as an authoritarian centrist. What I mean by that is I want to take the fringes and smash them together until we have something that makes sense. And the truth is, I'm very frustrated with our current political climate. A lot of what is on your guys' website and on some of your media on Twitter very much aligns with my frustration with the current political dynamics. I was raised conservative and libertarian and was probably libertarian for majority of my life. But as I grew up, I kind of realized that the state actually does have to have some influence on society and policy and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of left my libertarian roots alone. But then what I also found is that progressives drove me, and leftists in particular drive me absolutely insane. So, I try to find the middle ground in the policy that's actually functional, and then I end up just driving myself insane. So that's my politics summed up.
That's very fair. I see it on Twitter. A lot of the memes that's going on regarding.
I'm being a little bit meaner than usual. My apologies.
Oh, but I'm not mad at it. I mean, when I see the crazy blue-haired lefties going crazy with all their phobias, and then I see the red pillars saying their nonsense, it's like, bro, what are we doing right? What people are talking about right now?
Yeah, so if I had to decide a split, I spent about 70% of my time angering or making the blue-haired lefty progressives angry, and then I spent about 30% of my time making the red pill Christian nationalist Muslim theocrat red pill daters mad. So that's how I spend my time on Twitter.
That's very valid, very valid. So the topic of conversation, and we haven't really got into it. A few things we've talked about already, and you can provide your own opinion about it. We talked about the hearing regarding the FBI director, that came out recently, and that situation, and how a lot of Republicans were attacking their fellow Republican director. And we talked about how a lot of the people on the left is also attacking a fellow left dude and a Casparian. So
Yes,
a lot of people
lots of
attacking their own people.
cannibalization
Talked
going
about
on.
that for like 2 seconds, and then we just jumped into other things.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
that's
well,
very fair.
well. I think these subjects are aligned in the fact that it's political cannibalization of people who aren't like orthodox, people who don't believe every single party line. And I think that's one of the challenges, particularly on the right. I haven't seen FBI director. I think his name's Ray WRAY, if I remember correct. I haven't
Correct.
seen his testimony, but basically, when I was watching the Durham investigation, I noticed that there's a real divide between what seems like institutionalists people who believe in the republic, they believe in electoralism, they believe in liberal democracy, they believe in our law enforcement agencies, all that kind of stuff, versus people who are like rabidly anti-institutionalist. And so that's the divide. It's not left, right, or Republican or Democrat. It's institutionalist versus non-institutionalist.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm seeing. Especially, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Especially after Trump, it's definitely become very much so like that. And it's interesting how the conservative Republicans went from like very pro-establishment to very anti-establishment after his introduction. So it's very interesting to see how one man could change so much, of course. And that kind of brings us to the topic at hand in terms of American isolationism, because Trump was definitely a person who made it one of his foremost ideologies in terms of America first and focusing on America. And there's a lot of legitimacy about it. Me and Jonathan were talking about a little bit what we think about American isolationism. I think for the most part we can agree that if you're 100% either way, you're kind of insane. But let me hear your thoughts about American isolationism, of
Abolitionism.
course.
Yeah, and I do have to grab a baby, so you're gonna have to pardon one more interruption in a second, but I'll give you a rant that way you can digest it, and then I'll go pick up the baby. What I would say is I'm absolutely not a globalist. I think that what people kind of identify with globalism is that you are subsuming the American national interest to the global polity. You're not actually serving American working class and middle class folks. You'll gut the industry inside the United States in order to make profit for the international corporations that profit the most from globalism. And as a result, I think they become reflexively isolationist. That being said, I think that the American economy and the American empire, as I would describe it, is completely reliant on an international order, at which point it is the hegemon. So we benefit from cheap avocados, cheap electronics, cheap processors, all that kind of stuff. So we have to maintain our empire to some degree. So what's the balance between these two? Because of course I'm a centrist. It's internationalism. It's we are a nation. We have an identity. We have a public interest. We have a people to defend. And it's our job as a nation and our leaders to negotiate our interest in line with other nations to find a mutually beneficial thing that doesn't sacrifice our well-being for the global order.
All right,
And I'll
excellent.
be right back. I'm going to grab a newborn child and put him in a rocker.
Gotcha, gotcha. So there's three prongs I want to look at this topic of discussion. Morally, politically, and economically. I think a lot of them have innate value in terms of kind of discussing the topic and to figure out where exactly people should align in terms of America's involvement at the international scale. So the first one that is interesting is politically. And what I mean by this is obviously America's influence in all the other countries. What I mean by this, obviously, is their relationship with other countries. When it comes to conflict, that's also very much important in this discussion as well. So I guess, Jonathan, I'll start with you. What do you think about America's involvement with other countries in terms of being the international power versus isolationist? What do you think America's role should be politically, global, nationwide, or worldwide?
So I think that
All right, sorry about that. Just trying to balance 10 responsibilities at one time, and it's working out great.
I get it. No worries, no worries.
no
Yeah, so we're
problem.
discussing the three prongs here: America isolationism in terms of the moral aspect, the economic aspect, and the political aspect. And right now we're talking about America's involvement internationally in terms of their political influence. And Jonathan, go ahead. Let me know what you think.
I think that there is some. I think he made a good point. I think in some regards you can't separate economics from politics, and we do have an obligation, I think, to ensure our own best interest. And so when you want to do that economically, you kind of have to do it politically, right? Because you kind of have to smooze, ambassadors and other foreign heads of state. But we also should, I think, because we benefit when we have similar minded nations that are also open and take similar approaches that we do. Obviously, we've been doing trade with China to a certain extent, and obviously they're not very politically similar to us. But in other regards, we do a lot of other good trade with other nations that kind of are similar. We kind of stuck with Russia and China because of their size and scope and power. But if we can get them more on board with our politics, I think we could have an even better relationship with them. And so I think in that aspect, politically, it is prudent to do deal with them, to do business with them rather, and kind of influence them as best as we can.
Yeah, and that's the belief, or at least I think that was Nixon's gambit, which unfortunately I'm not a huge fan of, which is that he believed that economic and social liberalization, allowing China into the fold, which I guess at some point you really can't deny them anyways. So maybe he was just being realistic. But basically, with sorry if you hear a baby crying, I'm going to try to cuddle him. But basically, like the gambit has been, they become a dystopian nightmare now with a market economy. So that's pretty rough.
So economically, I do think it's interesting, but when I'm focusing on politically in terms of America's influence, I definitely think keeping good relationship with ambassadors is obviously important. But I guess my focus is really so when it comes to these relationships, is when should we get involved when conflict has arisen? Because in this, the perfect example is something that's going on right now when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. And obviously, we want to keep good economic relationship with someone like China, but even they have potential interest in going after Taiwan. And with America and its influence, one thing that we do know is obviously we're the strongest military power across the entire globe, and we are the people that all the other countries look at. Counterpoint said, we are the hegemon of all what is going on in terms of international interest, international conflict. So with a role like that, especially if you want to keep that level of influence and power, that levied responsibility across all nations, is it our duty, so to speak, especially with our allies that are part of NATO, is it our duty? And obviously, we know like if NATO gets attacked, we obviously will get involved. But in terms of other allies, or even your own personal opinion, is it our duty to really protect our allies politically and in conflict when circumstances like a Russia invading Ukraine or China invading Taiwan are stuff that is about to happen? So what are y'all thoughts
There's
about that?
yeah, there's a real rhetorical and political disconnect between our recruitment efforts, what our military is told, what our generals are told up until they reach a certain stratosphere, and same thing with what we tell the American people. And I think we just have to be honest with the American people. That's really the problem. Is we're telling the people of the United States one thing and we're doing another. So when we're growing up, we're told, oh, America's the good guys from World War II, and we came too late to save the Jews, but obviously it was vindicated that we got involved and we fought pure, bordering irrational evil when it came to Japan and Germany, and then like Russia, maybe we were a little bit too mean to leftists, but ultimately communism, authoritarian communism, was dystopian nightmares that are worse than American dystopia. So screw those guys too. And so we have this whole like really broad narrative of the United States national interest coming onto the global stage and then vying for its own influence. But I would say probably since the 70s and 80s, we've had like a international economic liberalization with the collapse of the communist shadow, the collapse of the communist empire. And so as a result, we're no longer serving just the American interest. We're serving the global capitalist economic interest. And so I think it's not as sexy to tell 18-year-old kids, hey, you're not signing up to protect truth, justice, in the American way, apple pie, whiskey, and strippers. What you're actually protecting is the right of McDonald's to build franchises in Oman and Iran. So that's like what you're really protecting with the American, military interest. So I think if you're honest, you'll probably have a less motivated military because they're not fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. But I think you'll have a more honest military with people who know what they're doing, which is holding together a global empire.
Jonathan, you want to add anything?
No, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I I definitely agree. When we talk about economically, I'm much more. I lean more isolationist when it comes to our economic influence. I do think obviously a lot of things that were said in terms of making sure we have good relations with our trade partners is important. A lot of people say that despite America's best efforts, maybe decades down the line, China's economic influence will equal America's. So we're gonna have to see how that kind of works out, especially if we don't establish good enough relations, how that works out with China really creeping up on us economically when it comes to their global influence. But I definitely am in the spirit of focusing on a lot of more homegrown jobs and industries getting popped up. I've heard arguments that the best way we can go about this is kind of talking about creating technology revolving around cars, obviously, AI technology, which is booming. Elon Musk decided to create AI too, so everybody's creating AI. So more jobs to create AI is obviously there. I've heard some arguments in terms of making sure we have proper technology in regards to 5G networks and creating more jobs regarding there. So I'm all in, especially since we won't have to be so reliant on China if we create more of these jobs to create more, manufacturer jobs, create more jobs in general at home and our nation's soil for the people. And obviously, when it comes to trade and everything, we want to keep those relations there. But if we're honest with people and we tell people that, hey, yeah, you're probably going into things at the interest of a lot of these corporations more so than not. I definitely see the honesty being important, but at the same time, I would be very unsure in the cooperation of the people if they hear something like that that's told to their face. And with the current kind of anti-establishment idea where they go like, hey man, the FBI is watching us, the FBI is a criminal, hey man, police, oh man, they hate all races, oh man, the Biden wants to protect his son all the time, they're very corrupt, all they do is have orgies all the time. So when when we have situations like these, it doesn't really, and then we kind of tell them, hey, yeah, we'll do this for corporations where people hate equally as much, arguably more so, how many people hate corporations nowadays. That probably would just uh,
You got to make it, you got to make it sexy, okay? You got to make it cool, all right? Like everybody I know who is worth their salt, they when they watch the movie Avatar, they're not rooting for the indigenous, blue Native Americans, okay? They're rooting for our boys in green, the guys with mech suits and machine guns and oxygen masks and all that kind of stuff. So you got to make it sexy and cool, and then on top of that, like you also have to sell along with the economic rationale. You have to sell what this really means to people. Okay. And what I mean by that is what they buy in their grocery store. We take things for granted that we just get endless amounts of wheat and endless amounts of bananas and avocados and consumer products and whatever advanced microchips from Taiwan that only they know how to manufacture that we're trying to figure out. We take it totally for granted that we're going to get access to these goods, but that's because we already exist in the $65 trillion commercial empire. This is like a fish swimming in water. Whereas if you let this thing collapse, all of these things break down. So I think you kind of you're right that there is something gross about being honest that you're dying for. I call it globo homo, but like globo corporations, progressive culture, all that kind of stuff. It's sad to tell an 18-year-old that, but I think it's a lot more moral if an 18-year-old is willing to risk his life and die for a better quality of life with a standard. And I think you can make a moral argument that it enables us to do this kind of shit. The only reason why you and I and Jonathan over here are able to connect via computers that are built by plastic, that are mined from cobalt from Africa, that are this, that, the other, you can explain global supply chains and why they're so important to daily life, particularly in the West.
Yeah.
Yeah, that type of knowledge is very valuable.
Jonathan's just gonna vibe out for the next hour. Yeah.
Hey, man, we're just spitting over here. But I wanna tackle that moral argument that you were talking about, and I think that's also very interesting to talk about because a lot of the human rights activists probably would argue that America's involvement internationally is that we are the strongest nation in the world. We are the most powerful military in the entire world. We are the country that all of our allies look to in terms of circumstances that are going on globally. Shouldn't we be involved to protect the people that are innocently getting, invaded like a Ukraine? Shouldn't we protect the people of Taiwan? In terms of morally, this should be our responsibility to protect the world from, like you said, the commies, for example, right? So that moral argument is definitely there, but how much weight do you guys think it actually has?
So this is my thing about that. I agree with sentiment, right? Absolutely, if we have the capability, we should be able to protect them. By the same token, though, progressively more and more, we're also having a kind of crisis of morals in our own country. And this is, I think, where the isolationism versus globalism comes on this aspect is, well, let's make sure that we don't have millions and millions and millions of illegal or even legal refugees coming in or immigrants if they're illegal because it's kind of pulling at the fabric or the seams of the fabric of our own country. And if we continue to allow that to happen while this is going on, while we're trying to involve ourselves with Russia, Ukraine, with China, Taiwan, with all these other, you know, skirmishes that happen over there, will our own nation be able to remain stable at that area? I think once we can batten down the hatches of our own sinking ship, then we can worry about other sinking ships. But just like with the airplane when it's crashing, like you got to put your own mask on before you put on somebody else's mask because you're not going to be any good. It doesn't matter how many border disputes we get involved with. I mean, we saw this when we pulled out of Afghanistan. It went to hell in a handbasket because we didn't do it right because we were trying to focus on too many things at once. We shouldn't be involving ourselves in these global issues if we're not even going to be around to kind of inherit that peace that we create. And then, when we kind of go away, what's going to happen? That's one of the problems is we did not equip well enough Afghanistan to handle our not being there, and then it just poof went away. So if we're the ones who are just, tyrannically imposing ourselves on other countries, and then we just all of a sudden are gone. Like it's going to cause way more chaos than any of the amount of order we created.
Okay, so I really love this, but I want to respond to it too. So Afghanistan's failure is not for a lack of trying. We spent billions of dollars in there. We spent hours and days and years training Afghan security forces. We tried to fight corruption. We tried to eradicate the drug trade. That didn't work. We tried to do a lot of things by imposing our moral system on people who simply did not want it. And I know that there's a bunch of there's actually just one person that I'm thinking of, Red Charlotte on Twitter, who still makes like moral arguments for American involvement in Afghanistan. But for all her cope about how some people want us there and that there's all these interpreters and local people who want us there, I think it's just cope. Because if there were that many people who wanted liberal democracy and Western style capitalism and American influence and all that kind of stuff, the country of Afghanistan would have not have collapsed to the Taliban in 11 days. Let's be real, okay? And so the reason why I think that this is different is Ukraine is not collapsing after 11 days, and we don't even have troops on the ground. In Afghanistan and Iraq, it was American troops that were kicking in doors with Afghan police and Afghan military behind them, not in front of them. Here it's Ukrainian soldiers who are taking doors. They just happen to have American weapons and ammunition.
So I just saw while we were live streaming, I didn't mention this, which I probably should have. I just saw Justin Biden authorizes Pentagon to send 3,000 reservists to Europe. So seems like we
Well,
might have people in there.
Where?
3,000 troops in Poland isn't that big of a deal. Okay.
Yeah. Where exactly in Europe are they going?
It just says it's just from I think from the watch, so I can't read the whole article. So
If it says Poland or Germany, we're
it
just
said Europe.
militarily posturing to tell Russia to fudge off.
Oh,
That's what we're really doing.
Probably. I
Hey,
can
man,
pull it up if you want me to, Adele.
Oh, you
Well,
can if
hold
you
on. So
want.
if I can kind of like, I know we're all about nuance and centrism and hybridizing perspectives and all that kind of stuff. I want to slide
Well, I
Jonathan's way
am.
real quick.
Jonathan is a conservative. He's not.
All right.
He's not a
Well,
centrist.
well, well. I want to slide Jonathan's way real quick. I think the difference that I pointed out between Ukraine and Afghanistan is material. I think it is absolutely relevant. However, I think that there can be much said about America having a much softer approach, where instead of putting boots on the ground and doing a physical invasion and having people who are capable of being shot, who have to fight a counterinsurgency and all that kind of stuff, I think it would be much more fruitful, less bloody, and probably less materially costly to simply fund people who want to work with us, who are already aligned with our values. So instead of trying to impose top down, you say, hey, if you want to work with us, you want to provide us material goods, you want to be a part of the EU, you want to be a part of like an international trades agreement, you want to be access to the market, all that kind of stuff, we'll help you, but we will train your security forces and we will give you the weapons and ammunition you need to fight your own conflicts. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it is your responsibility to fight these conflicts.
What funny thing is, I definitely align with a lot of that sentiment because when you really think about these situations, especially circumstances like you mentioned earlier, where they don't even want us here, there's really no innate benefit other than trying to adhere to some type of moral value for us to be in that circumstance in the first place. I agree that we should kind of, especially if they are more than willing to adopt the values that we currently possess, then obviously we should not only do what you said, but try to make sure that we're trying to establish a certain type of diplomacy inside that country as well. And that's why the situation with Ukraine is so interesting, especially now they're trying to join NATO. Is it seems like they're trying to work towards having a more Western value system. It seems
Eh,
like they're really. Well, you don't believe in Zelensky adopting it. Well, we'll have to see.
no.
We'll have to see. But from the surface, it does seem like he's
They
trying to do something like that. And then we're here doing what you're saying. We're not putting boots on the ground, or we're trying to help. But once it reaches a pinnacle where it seems like, okay, now Ukraine seems like they're about to lose, what should America do then?
Well, I don't think they're going to. I think what's realistic, at least from what I can tell, passively consuming information on the Ukrainian conflict, they're not going to lose Western Ukraine. They're not going to lose Lviv or Kiev or however the fuck you pronounce it. They're not going to lose Kherson. They're not going to lose any of that kind of stuff. That's all going to stay in Ukrainian hands. When it comes to Donetsk and Luhansk, I don't think they're going to take it back because one, they have to fight through Russian regular forces, and then two, there's a strong chance that they would have to fight an insurgency against militias that were sympathetic to Russia. That's a nightmare, and they shouldn't engage in it because that's basically what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. And counterinsurgency work is a nightmare. Nobody should want to actively engage in it. But that being said, I think Russia could retain Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, and then Ukraine could take down or take the area of Zaporozhia, which is basically the land bridge between like Donetsk and Crimea. And if they take that area back, I think it's actually it's morally imperative that the United States go to Ukraine and say, "This is as good as it's going to get. We will support you going into the EU. We will support you going into NATO, but you need to sue for peace. This is as good as it's going to get. Give Russia Ukraine, or excuse me, Ukraine should give Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea to Russia. Call it a day. This is the best deal we're going to get. And then if you're not going to take that deal, we're going to stop giving you so many weapons and bullets and money."
If Biden is willing to
He
kind of
doesn't.
make that aggressive proposition to Zelensky. I'm
He
not
doesn't have
sure.
the appendage for that.
He said,
Well, but apparently there's ultranationalists in Ukraine who wouldn't go for that, but I'm pretty sure that they can be brought to the table really easily when they stop receiving bullets and F-16s and missiles and communications gear and artillery and HIMARS rockets.
I
That's a
think one
that's a
of the
lot of
problems.
leverage.
I think this is one of the issues with that, and I like I haven't read up a whole lot on like the whole strategy that's being taken place, but I don't think it behooves America if they want that kind of solution if they just keep sending money, if they keep sending armaments, if they keep sending all these things, Ukraine has no motivation to sue for peace. Because if they're going to continue to receive all of these nice new equipment, just the funds that go there as well, they don't have much of an incentive to stop because it kind of is a stalemate. I lean towards more the notion that Ukraine or that Russia is doing better. This is coming from Russia. I typically just don't trust a lot of their news systems. Call me crazy, but anything that comes from Russia saying, "Oh, we're doing really good," I mean, this war has been going on for what, almost 2 years now? 2 years now,
Yeah.
more than 2 years. I think if Russia was going to have won, they would have done it a while ago.
Yeah.
That's simply my belief. Call me crazy, but as long as America keeps sending funds and money and armaments to Ukraine, they have no imperative to stop. They have no imperative to call it quits. It has to be America saying, these are your two options. In X amount of days, you will stop receiving funds from us, you'll stop receiving money from us, you'll stop receiving guns from us, and you can either continue on your own or you can say, this is what's going to happen. You're going to keep these lands, and we're going to keep this, and we're just going to call it good.
Yeah, in the reason why what's funny is I have a couple of people in chat who disagree with me. They actually think that the American and Ukrainian position is it's all or nothing, which I don't think that they're militarily or logistically capable of achieving. So then you're just talking about like a decades long conflict along these hyper militarized borders that sucks the wealth and energy and youth out of both countries, which I think is horrible for all parties involved. Unfortunately, I think we're stupid enough to do something like that. But what I think we should do, an ought claim, I think the ought claim should be Russia wants a warm water port in Crimea. That's why they want to keep it. It's the same reason why they went to Syria and they kept Assad in. Russia wants the majority ethnically Russian places to be under Russian control. Technically, they're autonomous zones or whatever the fuck, but they don't want those places to be under Ukrainian control. They don't want them to be shelled. They don't want the local people to get artillery struck by Ukraine. Those are totally reasonable asks, considering that this is their geopolitical backyard. This is the equivalent of like Russia coming to Cuba and then us not being willing to give up like Guantanamo Bay in order to get peace. Like we need to have kind of realistic expectations of what's militarily possible and what's good for everybody. And I think this is where the hyper globalist anti-human perspective would be, let's just feed Ukrainians into a meat grinder in order to sabotage Russia so the rest of the world can do well. I think the centrist internationalist argument would be Ukraine needs to do well, Russia needs to do well, and the international order needs to do well. What's the solution that works for everybody best?
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially, I mean, does am I wrong in the assumption that Ukraine still provides a large, if not the most amount of grain? Are they still
Grain,
in wheat?
grain and natural gas is huge, huge parts of their economy.
So they do need to do well, which is one of the
Yeah.
things that we talked about before. Like in some ways, like soft kind of. I hesitate to use the word indoctrination, but like indoctrination of work well with us, be more democratic, and one can argue that, like Riddell was saying, maybe they are. I disbelieve that based on history and all that sort of thing. I think they're just
It's
still
still Eastern Europe,
standards.
okay?
It's
Cut them some
still,
slack.
I
It's
mean, yeah,
Eastern Europe.
it's still, yeah, yes.
And man, that could be the Western version of an Eastern European country. It's possible.
Yeah, that's the best we could hope for. Like 30% corrupt, okay? Just a little bit of corruption, a little bit off the top. The cop is only asking for a $50 bribe instead of a $200 bribe, okay? And we can only do so much.
Exactly. We're getting there. But I think an interesting hypothetical to think about, because this also falls in line with this kind of moral discussion, is what if Putin says no? What if United States and Zelensky in Ukraine try to broker peace, try to reach a certain type of kind of understanding, maybe give up the areas, the territory that you were mentioning. But Putin, after, like you said, around 2 years of this, considering he did this, he decided to start this. and all he can get is this territory for 2 years of conflict, and all the kind of restrictions that happen in Russia in the meantime. What if he tries to compensate it by saying, "Hey, nah, I want more." At that point, in terms of
But
America's responsibility, are we just going to give up on Ukraine?
no, of course not. What we're gonna do is we're gonna force Russia to feed their generational youth into a high technology meat grinder. Russian conscripts armed with SKS rifles and soft body armor and ammunition that's rotting outside of their pouches and all that kind of stuff. They can get artillery striked by rockets that are capable of hitting the ass hair on a spider. That's just the way that it is. And that's unfortunate. I don't want that to happen to Russia's youth. I actually think it's a cultural and historical crime that Europe and Russia have been so opposed for so long. I don't think there's really any logical divide between these cultures that couldn't be bridged by some, reaching out and understanding. But the truth is, if Vladimir wants to double down, then he can double down into some HIMARS rockets.
What do you
Well,
think, Jonathan? I'm very
so
curious on your opinion about this.
so out of just the latter part of his statement first, I think Russia, for all of its saying that the USSR has collapsed, is really not. They're still a pretty communist nation, I think, ideologically. And I do think America and the Western belief system, and this is, I think, part of the reason why we would say this as Americans is that we can bridge the gap, right? America, the West, and communism. But communism inherently cannot exist in a world in which the West lives, which is where the ideological tension comes for so long, an unbridgeable gap. Because the West can exist in a world in which communism does, but not vice versa. It doesn't go the other way around, which is why there will, as long as communism exists, it will be ideologically opposed to the West. As for what happens if Putin says, "No, I want more," I think there's a prudential matter, and then the prudential matter is the one that you said Connor, right? Connor pointed out, and they do provide us a lot of natural gas. There's a lot of grain to be given there, so maybe we should consider that. But the problem would be the risk of more than just the United States getting involved at that point. Then we're looking at a potentially another, maybe Europe would jump in. And then if they jumped in, maybe Ukraine or maybe Russia would get somebody to side in. I'm looking, I have a map pointing at me. So if we got involved, chances are, probably Great Britain may or may not get involved. Maybe parts of other Europe would get involved. Certainly, it seems, Belarus was the nation that kind of sided with Russia a little bit in that little Wagner revolt. Maybe they get involved with Russia, and then we have another world war on our hands. And I think that is equally as imprudent as it would be prudent to help Ukraine. And so then we're stuck in a little bit of a
The,
pickle of what do we
yeah,
do?
but here's this thing is I really wish that conservatives in particular would kind of debate like far leftists, kind of like the people that I spend time with, Vosh, Demon Mama. I'm trying to think of some of the tankies, but Hakeem or God help me. I'm trying to think of some other ones, but basically, there's a bunch of leftists, and they have a very theological approach to socialism and communism, and by that I mean like they're indoctrinated. They believe in it. It's very visceral. It's very well defined. And so when we're talking about socialism, if you're talking to a Marxist or a leftist, it's defined as the decommodification of basic human need and workers owning the means of production. So basically, human needs are taken care of, and then on top of that, the workers control everything. Now, the thing is, when you look at the Soviet Russia or Maoist China, what really happened was the state said, "Vest the power in us, and we will make sure that everyone is taken care of." As far as I understand history, they never achieved the Marxist definition of socialism, let alone communism, which, if I understand communism from a leftist frame, is like a moneyless, stateless, classless society. That's how they define it. So communism is like this ethereal utopian paradise that has never occurred in reality. Socialism is the thing that has been implemented in really flawed, brutish, violent ways that leftists themselves will never admit to being good, but they'll still kind of play defense for. And for me, when I look, just to bring this all home, when I look at the collapsed Soviet Union and I see Russia in its sphere of influence, I don't see people who are dedicated to the teachings of Marx and Lenin. I see people who look at the greatness of their national history, being a peer competitor with the United States, beating us in the space race for a little bit, having military technologies that were on par with us, making Europe piss their pants whenever they flex their muscles. I see people who miss being great and want to return to some level of greatness. And I still don't feel like that is an unbridgeable gap. Final rant. Russia has really cool fucking technology. Their logistics are just dog shit. And so I think it's okay to say, hey, Russia, you're taking the L on the logistics, but I really like the way your fighter jets look. Like that, they look cool. we can give them some props.
It's very that's a very empathetic view of Russia that I definitely appreciate for a certain extent because I mean I don't really talk. I mean, ever since the conflict, you don't really hear anybody, unless they're kind of some crazy conspiracy theorists, talk positively about Russia, of course, and Putin, of course. So it's a interesting viewpoint to kind of look at Russia in that vein, as the nation that's not focused on dominating based on this kind of not efficient ideological political ideology, but more so focused on trying to be a powerful nation that competes with America again. Um, and there's a certain sentiment that I think everybody can understand. I mean, Americans are a little bit kind of spoiled because most people in our, I mean, definitely people, me and your generation, Jonathan, these people grew up in the most powerful nation, right? We don't have to worry about that. All of our kind of complaints come back from a much more kind of spoiled mindset. But with that said, and looking at this kind of situation in terms of American isolationism, or I give up. And look,
Isolationism.
it's never gonna work. When looking at this circumstance, from my understanding, from everybody, and my own kind of viewpoint, is that the moral argument is valid because obviously we're all humans too, but it's not a argument that should solely focus on the decisions that are being made from us as a country, right? Seems like the foremost decisions that should be made obviously will be coming economically, our economic interest. That's obviously how we're going to grow as a nation. And I'm under the vein, and I think you two guys are very similar, is that we should definitely focus more so with the having more jobs and not relying on other countries like China as much as we are currently. And then obviously the political sentiment obviously is focused on making sure America kind of retains the power and keeps international peace to a certain extent, that we're not kind of putting ourselves in another world war. So I guess the last point to bring up in this discussion is a lot of people argue that America has so many problems. We are so problematic in so many issues, whether people are complaining about the cops, whether people are complaining about, or legitimately complaining about the public education system or the poor communities and trying to fix those situations. In terms of these more domestic complaints and issues that people are having with our country versus our international interests, what do you guys believe is the proper line we should go in terms of focusing on domestic interests versus international interests? Do you put your line in terms of those values?
Well, I can rant for 3 minutes, Jonathan. You got a rant in your chamber, or should I just go?
I don't rant typically, so you go first, and then I'll.
Okay. So what I would say is there's this great quote from the movie Full Metal Jacket where he's talking about Vietnamese people, and he says, "Inside every single Vietnamese slur is an American waiting to crawl out." And I really do feel that like that's relatively true. People, relatively speaking, they like freedom, they like liberty, they like the freedom of conscience, they like the ability to choose their religion, they like the ability to choose their sexual partner, they like the ability to choose their work. So, generally speaking, I think mixed economy, capitalist liberal democracy is the way to go. Then, when it comes to how do we deal with that in an international relation sense, we do have competitors and rivals that we have to recognize. uh, China is running a state capitalist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, dystopian authoritarian nightmare that we basically need to rival and destroy. They need to have a USSR level social collapse. They just need to, in order for the world to be secure. When it comes to Russia, I think it's more like a kleptocracy. It's like four mobsters in a trench coat pretending to be a country. They just need to be. They just need to. They will collapse because it's a kleptocratic nightmare. So when it comes to liberal democracies, how do we make sure that we don't collapse the United States itself under its own weight and under its own problems by taking on too much? What I think that you do is you delegate those responsibilities to other people in a way that actually they can handle. France and Germany have the economic capacity to be military powers that are capable of holding down Western Europe. Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, while individually are not capable of holding down Eastern Ukraine with or Eastern Europe, excuse me, they are capable of forming an Eastern European alliance that could check Russia, and with American backing, would be perfectly fine and militarily expedient and vicious to fight. When it comes to like Africa and South and Central America and all that kind of stuff, these are places where we need to look for partners, people who are looking to work with us. That way, we don't have to pay narco death squads to go execute people in the middle of the night. We probably need to have a less heavy handed, more moral approach when it comes to relating with these countries. But I think what will collapse us is if every time there's a problem, this is just like Rome, every time there's a problem, you just send the United States military. Eventually, we're going to run out of blood and we're going to run out of treasure and we're going to run out of the will to fight. Whereas if we just say, hey, you become a part of this thing and you fight your own battles, but we'll support you and train you. And if you fight for it yourself, we'll make you rich and happy and free. That's infinitely more sustainable on a broad scale.
So one of the things I think is I agree with that approach overall, and I think Rome came to a place where that was true. But for a long time, and I think this is kind of my approach is first we have to worry about ourselves, right? And so let's just say for the sake of this theoretical proposition that we have a very strong American identity again. I agree with everything you said about Europe and how that could work and how those could kind of put a check on these other countries. But when it comes to conflicts that comes, one of the things that Rome did that was very intelligent and did a great job is because this there was an idea that this is Rome. When they went to other countries and conquered them, those that joined the military gained citizenship, but those are the ones who served in the military. What about the other ones? So what they would do a lot of times is so say we had some skirmishes in North Africa and we had to go down there and the citizens would be given like a one quarter Roman status, and so they'd earn some of the privileges, and then through time they could work their way up to full citizenship, and that worked as a great way. But unfortunately, we have this anti-imperialism mindset now, which one can argue is either good or bad. But in the same ways that you were talking about earlier, is there kind of is this more national identity that everybody wants anyways, and that is the globalist identity of being we're not a member of earth, or I mean we're not a member of America, we're just a member of earth. And I think that's the same thing as imperialism. It's just globalist imperialism that's not good because there is no cohesive identity there. Because if Asia still has Asian religion and Asian ideology and Asian morals, and America has American and the West has the West, those eventually will clash, just as communism in America and the West would clash as well. So if we're going to do these sort of things, we should have this system of Americanizing, because everybody on this, particularly on this conversation, acknowledges that America is the best. And I still believe America is the best. I believe the West broadly created the best cultures, and why not acculturate people? I don't think we should force people per se, but if I'm going to put my interests in North Africa in a skirmish there in Ukraine, you better darn believe I want to get something out of it. I'm not a charity. Nations can't be charities, in my
Okay,
opinion.
so
So I did rant. There you
you
go.
said no,
You got
no, no. You said something wildly important, and I think that this is actually probably the main thing that differentiates me from leftist liberals or progressives. So I think that there has to be like mandated, or else we will collapse, an American identity. And what I think that is because we have Indian Americans, we have Native Americans, we have white Americans, we got Anglo Americans, Celt Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans. We got so many different kinds of people who are citizens of the United States that we can't just say, oh, yeah, this is a European descended idea that speaks English and it's realistically, it belongs to the English and the Germans and the Celts, but it doesn't belong to anybody else. They're just second class citizens that we tolerate in our system. That can't be the way that it works, or else a majority of the people who participate in the system are not going to have any kind of buy in into it. So, what I boiled down the American identity to, because I think that fundamentally it is like liberal republicanism, it's the right of free speech and freedom of conscience, the ability to articulate your ideas in public without fear of the government stepping on you. That's like one of the most principled things that is American. The second one is the right to self defense, up to and including against a tyrannical government. I think that's another fundamental cornerstone of the concept of liberty and an American conception of liberty, where if the government turns against you and starts murdering people, it's not even like kind of like a moral thing that you take on begrudgingly. Americans face that with enthusiasm. They're like, oh, there's a tyrannical government, let's go shoot them in the face. Like that's like part of the American zeitgeist. And then finally, what I would say is it's a limited government. And I don't mean limited government in the sense of scale. Like you could have a big American government or a small American government. What I mean is a government that actually tries to follow its own rules that are set out for it within republicanism. Balance of power, the judiciary being independent of the executive branch having checks on its power through the pocketbooks of the Congress, all that kind of stuff. All of those conceptions of having the rule of law kind of govern the society and then respecting that overarching principle, I think is fundamentally American. And so if we lose, I think these are like the three cornerstones as far as I can identify them in the Constitution. If we lose any parts of these identity, I think we fall into very obvious historical pitfalls.
I'm glad you brought that up because legit my question after Jonathan was going to be focusing on something like that. And you can elaborate a little bit more if you want to. But it was going to focus on the question on what is more valuable, America establishing that national identity or America establishing a foreign image that all other countries respect. And the fact that you answer the fact that you even brought up the fact that we should establish a national identity is extremely valuable, of course, because a lot of people, a lot of countries say it all the times that they kind of despise Americans. They see all this news regarding America and they see all these kind of slander in regards to the American people. So there's a very some of it is true, but there's a very poor image in terms of Americans in general and what we do in our society. They may sometimes some countries that are way more underdeveloped than us think that we are like an anarchist country. And it's kind of a crazy thing, but some countries actually think this. So that's obviously that goes and coincides with establishing that national identity. But the other aspect is obviously our foreign image. And that is the aspect of America being a superpower, America being the country that all of y'all look towards us, all of y'all ask for our opinions. So if you want to elaborate, you can, Connor. Jonathan, you can go as well. What is more important, our foreign image or our national identity?
Yeah, I view these concepts as inextricably linked. And I actually think that part of our identity crisis is leading to our foreign appearance falling apart. So we have like ideals and ideology and internal and external propaganda and all that kind of stuff. But what happens is we haven't fundamentally, defined what it is to be an American. And then we're creating like 30,000 different narratives about what it is to be an American without any sense of coherence. And so for me, the problem with that is it's kind of like having a building that has like rotted beams by termites. So you might see this like grand, beautiful structure on the exterior. It's one of the biggest buildings you've ever seen in your entire life. It rivals like Notre Dame de Paris as far as like a cathedral or something like that. And then you walk inside, and for me, the American civic identity is the support structure. So if you kick a support structure and it rots and falls apart and collapses a part of the cathedral ultimately doesn't matter. And this is something that happens. I'll try to wrap this up, but this is something that happens in like plant life. It's something that happens in buildings. It's something that happens in skyscrapers. If you focus solely on exploding the exterior superstructure without having integrated support throughout the entire thing, eventually you're going to hit a size that forces you to collapse back down on yourself. And what the only thing that's going to be left at the end of that is whatever was sustainable in the first place.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also say that they're linked. I could two things. One, I totally agree. We obviously have to have a cohesive narrative about what it means to be American. Because if you don't have that, then your foreign presence will, of course, collapse. Secondly, I have had the amazing privilege to live abroad and travel abroad extensively. So I lived in Africa, and I was a little bit young to say um, what the Africans thought about America because I was young. Um, One thing they did love is our money. Everywhere we went, when they saw the color of our skin, when they saw that we were white, they're like, "Oh, double the price for everything." So they loved our money. That's for sure. But that was all the way back in 2011. But I lived in Australia for a while as well, and most European countries, or I should say Commonwealth countries, have this perspective about Americans, and they think that we're insane and crazy, and that we have guns and just murder people en masse all the time when somebody looks at us the wrong way. And I'm like, you know what? I'm actually fine with that opinion because you know what they're never gonna do? They're never gonna come here and be like, "Oh, give me your wallet," and be like, "No." Well, firstly, they don't even have any guns, so they pull a knife, and then I'll pull out my gun and be like, "You were right, buddy." And anyways, but and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that as long as there is also the sense of like, we used to make amazing westerns about where it was wild and it was crazy, but people had honor and respect. And we're losing the honor and respect because of the collapse of our civic structure, as Connor called it, because we ourselves don't know what we are anymore. And also, there's something to be said. America is one of the only place with nominally free press. Most other, especially European countries, especially Russia, especially a lot of these places, their press is not free. Right, it is all owned by the state, and so whatever they want to do. So, like when I was in Australia when Donald Trump got elected, and so that was a fun day because they all thought that it was going to be the end of foreign trade entirely, and that the economy was going to collapse and the global economy was going to collapse and all these things because they were not it's not free press anywhere. And so when you hear stories from other countries, it's like just imagine all of their press is CNN. So and then you got it.
Yeah, so hold on. You said something really important, which kind of goes back to back when Jordan Peterson. I don't think he's eaten vegetables in like 20 years, but let's just say that he still had like vegetables in his system in 2016 to 2018. One of the things that he was talking about that I think is incredibly important is the rearticulation of ideas that we no longer find valuable but have value. And so, for instance, I think if you walked and if you pulled like million American high school students and you ask them what honor was, one, they wouldn't be able to define it, and then two, they would appeal to some like historical thing where they'd be like, oh, it's like when knights used to joust each other, and if you insulted somebody, they would get upset, and then also it's kind of like in Pakistan where if somebody sleeps with your cousin, you have to crush their head with a rock. Like that would they would view it as like this like barbaric trope of history that needs to die. Whereas, kind of like growing up and learning more about different concepts and virtues and all that kind of stuff, honor, as far as I can tell it, all it is identifying the higher virtues that you should strive for as a human being, striving for those virtues, and then people holding you in higher esteem for trying to strive for those virtues. So it's basically trying not to be a piece of shit actively. That's what it is. So that is a concept that's worthy of articulation because I think that in our modern society, we don't even try that. We say being a piece of shit is good. I can go onto Twitter right now and I can find half a dozen to a dozen fucking spoiled bitchy brat millionaires with fucking baby soft fucking hands fighting with each other about doing cocaine and banging fucking Instagram models. And these are the people who get thousands upon thousands of live stream views. And like I'm not saying like I don't blame the viewers, they're just trying to be entertained. But at the same time, if we valorize that as a part of our culture, we can't be surprised when the next generation are baby soft handed fucking baby back bitches who can't fucking do anything and they value doing cocaine and chasing Instagram models more than they value any kind of virtuous life.
Yeah, I definitely agree to the sentiment of establishing proper values. This will be the last point, and we can wrap things up. the national identity situation, and I co-sign a lot of the things. I also agree they're linked, but very much so, like you guys were saying, is one thing we should probably focus on more so is probably establishing proper values, virtues, and a national identity. And that's something we have to continuously work on, and it doesn't help, obviously, considering the polarization we have currently in the country. But when it comes down to that polarization, it's very interesting that when other countries kind of perceive us as Americans, they also see us in like two different lights. They see us as gun crazy individuals who want to shoot everybody, like we were talking about, or people
True.
who want to make everybody trans. So we have
True.
we have very opposite kind of viewpoints, perceptions that our other countries are seeing. These do not align at all. They both sides hate each other, but they kind of see us as these two things. That kind of tells you, that sheds light on how far our national identity is into establishing as like one cohesive value. So it'll be, in order to do what you're saying, in order to kind of establish these type of values, I do think one step, like Connor was saying, is really centering on virtues that we all agree with. Even though some lefties kind of don't like guns, they want to take away everybody's guns. So even that one is kind of hard. But
But sorry, you're about to nail it, and then I want to respond. Sorry.
so, but with that said, there are, at the end of the day, there are the virtues itself. Even if you want to talk about the gun one, the virtue itself will be able to, especially when you reassess this to all types of people, culturally and socially. And this is something that has to be communicated person to person, individually. This is not something that a country can establish onto people, but people have to establish onto other people. Like you said before, on social media, I get the wanting to be entertained, but practically looking at what you're observing and what things that should matter, things regarding all the crazy stuff red pillars say, and all the crazy stuff all these billionaires get into, are stuff that you don't even like individually. You just want to be entertained by it. So, yeah, you were about to say something before
Yes.
we wrap things up.
Yes. So I think what the reason why I picked the values that I did in order to describe them as like the coherent American identity is because exactly what you said. It is somebody who is a progressive blue-haired trans person and a cowboy off of the streets of South Dakota or something like that, who's ready to blast you with a 500 Action Express. I forget if that's a revolver caliber or a rifle caliber, but you get the point. Like, if you have a gun nut, cowboy, conservative, or if you have a trans person, they can and should sign up for the three ideas that I was talking about. The reason why both of them should sign up for freedom of speech and freedom of conscience is because both of them get to have their say over public society and get to argue it out in the public square, and neither one of them has to feel like they're going to get killed for espousing their ideas, particularly by the state. When it comes to self-defense, Americans in general, kind of like Jonathan and I, red-blooded Americans, we want to retain the right to self-defense. Like I don't care what happens as far as gun control goes. If they ban certain types of guns that I own, I'm not reporting those things. I'm just putting them in the closet until the ban is repealed. So I'm not turning that shit in. You can go fuck yourself. And trans people should want to defend themselves as well because they're a sexual minority who is sometimes persecuted and taken advantage of and enslaved into sex work and beaten up by society and all that kind of stuff. Self-defense should be a fundamental concept for them as a community as well. And then finally, believing in a government that regulates itself. The reason why that's so important is because for the conservative person, they should want a just system because what systems you want to conserve are systems that are worth defending. So a conservative should want a just system that plays fair for everybody. And then the reason why a trans person should want a just system is because as the minority, they should want a system that doesn't isolate them and persecute them and try to kill them. So that's really what you said. I know I said a lot of words, but I think that both people, no matter how distant on the political spectrum or sexual spectrums or economic spectrums, they can agree to these three concepts, which is why they should be fundamentally American.
Do you agree with these three concepts as a conservative, Jonathan? The three most important virtues?
I more or less, yeah. Well, we'll just say yeah, because I could go on another hour-long debate on certain things, but yeah, fundamentally, I would agree with those. Um, I reference I think I referenced it before. There's a letter that John Adams wrote to the Abbe de Mablé talking about the four things that makes America America. The first one is local government. Second one is the education system. Third one is the churches, and then the fourth one is the militia. And the three things that he got were three of them. The fourth one was the church, and I think that is fundamental to to the American belief is the Christian church. But that's a topic for another day.
Well, actually, so I know we might be wrapping up, but this is an important thing too. I don't agree with you that you're saying that it isn't the right of the state to enforce these morals on people. I agree that it shouldn't enforce these virtues on adults. Where if somebody is not breaking the law, they're not hurting other people, they're expressing themselves within life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or whatever, then the government shouldn't go after them. But I actually do view it as a fundamental responsibility of the United States government to make sure that the education system is expressing values that are American, that
Oh, yeah,
reinforce the system
completely
instead of
agree.
degrading and destroying the system. So if you have, like, I love free speech, but if you have middle school and elementary school kids who are being taught that, like, yeah, gender is just like this amorphous thing and you can pick it, don't worry about it, it is what it is. If you're non-binary, if you're, trans or whatever, that is going to dictate the way that the culture comes out. And I think that there's something to be said for like liberal tolerance, where you tolerate everybody, you tolerate minorities and all that kind of stuff. But I also think that there's something like progressive postmodern nihilism, where you don't believe in anything because everything is equally valid under your shitty fucking perspective. So I think American education should be fundamentally anti-postmodernist.
That's a very interesting perspective when it comes down to education. I mean, me and Jonathan talked about constantly. I've constantly criticized public education, consistently in terms of what they provide for people realistically, especially in the lower kind of education systems. But the idea of kind of establishing values originally, obviously, it was something that was the original purpose in a lot of ways, establishing what it is to be American. We definitely drifted away from that, especially currently in society, in where conversations like you mentioned definitely can and might be brought up in certain circumstances. Um, I think ideally, I definitely would agree that a state can have that type of responsibility, especially if we have the proper, like you said, checks on the government, making sure that they're adhering to values that the people themselves set. That would be very important to do. I guess the worry for people would be, are those values truly being represented from the people or the people in the government, which will be the argument, obviously. And I guess the other thing about that too is when it comes down to establishing that type of precedent, the popularization of private education and charter schools as of right now is ever so increasing. If the precedent is set is where you can establish certain values, how would you be able to kind of dictate these private institutions that the values that you're establishing in your institution are not aligned with the American values that we need to be presenting or we need to be establishing for the people in general?
I'm still here. Sorry if my camera conked out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk even if my even if my picture is weird, I'll get it reset in just a second. But basically, what I would say is you're just going to have to giga chat this, okay? You're going to have to say, you know what? These are the values that our founders espoused. These are the values that our fathers and grandfathers espoused. These are the values that we care about. These are the things that we think are fundamental to propagate a country into the future. We believe, X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And you're going to have to appeal to popularity. You're going to have to appeal to utilitarianism. And you're going to have to appeal to a sense of responsibility for the future. And at some point, you're just going to have to tell progressives and postmodernists to shut the fuck up. And you're just going to have to say, hey, listen, if you want to smoke cigarettes and talk about the age of consent and talk about, nihilism and Foucault and all that kind of bullshit,
Cigarettes are
you
too
go.
conservative. They'd be smoking doobies.
Yeah, well, exactly. But but if you want to talk about that kind of crap, you say that for college. We're trying to establish, healthy, happy, productive citizens who don't want to kill themselves and largely don't want to do anything egregious to their bodies or their morals or anything like that. And if you don't like that, wait until you're 18 and then do whatever the fuck you want. And I think it would take a concerted political effort by conservatives, liberals, and centrists, and any brand of rightoid to actually get that passed. Because unfortunately, liberalism is so waffly that exactly what you just asked is what's going to be said over and over and over again. Like, why are we imposing our morals on other people? And the answer should be because they're good.
I guess the last question I have to ask this because innately we want to establish an American national identity, obviously. But at the same time, if we're trying to establish values in public institutions, public educational institutions, that has to be done at the state level. So how do you tell these states, because a state like California versus a state like Florida, we know have completely different values. I know exactly what DeSantis wants to preach to his people versus what the senator, whatever his name is in California, wants to preach to his people. So they're going to align with the general formation of the American values may align to a certain extent, but once they get into the specific details, they will choose the affiliation that they align with as the centermost principled value that you should focus on, with the foundation being the overarching opinion. So go ahead.
Two things. So the way that I articulated that freedom of speech and conscience, right to self-defense, and a limited government that follows its own rules are the cornerstones of the American identity. I think the federal government just has to insist that that is a part of our primary education. And by that, I mean like elementary, middle, and high school. You just have to insist that those are the values that unite a Californian and a Floridian, and a Floridian and a person from New Hampshire, and a New Hampshire and a person from South Dakota. These are the values that unite us. And then I think you have to use federal subsidization. So let's say that California becomes like a total commie shithole where they want to basically teach postmodernism to elementary school kids, and they want to go absolutely fucking buck wild on it. And let's say that Florida becomes where I am right now. Let's say it becomes a Christian theocracy where gay people are banned back into the closet, and somehow we deport all of Mexico, which I don't think is going to happen. Like let's just say that these two things happen simultaneously. You have to say, if you want the billions upon billions of dollars that are inside the federal treasury that currently subsidize your education process, you have to abide by these tenets. And if you don't, you can go fuck yourself. And I think that's the path forward.
Okay. I respect it. Sometimes you gotta do what's necessary. I definitely see where you're coming from. I always align with that principle to an extent. It's just I don't trust the people who are enforcing the principle sometimes, which definitely makes it tough. But Jonathan, any words you would like to say?
So I agree in principle. The one distinguishing thing that I would make is inherently people know what's right from wrong. So if a state is doing something that is correct and doing something that is virtuous and doing something that is honorable, we shouldn't penalize them. And I would say obviously Christian theocracy is the way to go. But so that's just me though. So we shouldn't punish them, but we should blow California off of the continent and just send it out into
Bro.
the sea. So
Yeah, like people always talk smack whenever I talk smack about like California and New York, and they're like, the economies are so big and the cultures are so vibrant and and I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't give a fuck. We would
no,
figure it out,
every
okay?
single big company is moving to Tennessee or moving to Florida. So their economies aren't that great.
We would figure it out. We would figure out a way to take the produce and the money from investment and all that kind of stuff, and then we would figure out how to run the rest of the country in a sensible way without those two fucking cultural deadweights from my perspective.
See, the reason why I can't agree is because I root for the Golden State Warriors and I root for the New York Giants. So there's no way I'm going to agree to that.
Right.
But hope. All right. So I think that's all we got for today. I think it was a very interesting discussion. plenty of solutions were brought out, and the government, Biden, should just listen to the podcast, and then you kind of figure out how to fix America's national identity problem there, and we can go from there. So, with that said, hope you guys enjoyed per usual. Appreciate you coming on, Connor. I think it was an excellent conversation once you hopped on and started listening to your values and your opinions. And at the end of the day, like I've said time and time again, the purpose of the podcast here is to focus on solutions more so than the political bias, toxicity, negativity, trash talk nonsense that tends to happen all the time. Especially when they're not talking about anything, just complaining about everything. I mean, what does that help? That doesn't really help any situation. So also, I definitely advocate, and I'm going to continuously advocate that just because you're listening doesn't mean you can't do anything, because at the end of the day, if you agree with a principle, or even if you have your own principles per se, you can always get involved. You can always try to advocate your own principles, vote, support a official, or support a policy. The more people get involved, actually have common sense, the better. So that's what we want to do at the end of the day. So I hope you guys enjoy. Rate it 5 stars per usual. Any final words before we wrap it up?
Yeah, so if you're into science fiction or science fantasy and violence, my primary channel is about the fun and fantastic and grimdark universe of Warhammer 40,000. So if you like fully automatic machine guns that fire 75 caliber bullets that explode into alien torsos, then go ahead and check out my main channel. It's doing pretty well. I released a video today that's doing pretty good, so go ahead and check that out. And then if you want more political centrist hot takes, then go ahead and check out my second channel. It's linked in the description, called Counterpoints Coliseum. And then if you want to check out just like an essay where, similar to how I just ranted for like 3 minutes at a time over and over again, you just want a solid 15 to 20 minute rant about a particular subject, check out my third channel. It's an essay channel, and that's where I do that. And then what I would say is, if there's any millionaire or billionaire centrists, it seems like all of them are progressive, or all of them are uber conservative, or anarcho-capitalist. If we can find any millionaire or billionaire centrist, I am very cheap. Pay me $60,000 a year, and that will cover my bills. And I will run for elected seats. I will go yell at President Biden on the seats of the Senate, or the House, or wherever the fuck I can find them, or the White House itself. I will talk shit around American civic nationalist centrist values that actually bring us together instead of ripping this country apart. So yeah, I'm cheap and I'm available. I just need a backer. So.
Yeah, I respect that. I'm definitely not old enough to do any of that, but I will support him doing that. I'll watch and go like, oh, finally someone asking some good questions. That's great. That's great. There we go. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed per usual. This was a great conversation. Y'all have a good one.